Jimin gives up the dream stage for Jungkook's sake. A silent embrace louder than words sparkles. The lights died mid-beat, and in the sudden darkness Jimin heard Jungkook whisper, fractured and terrified, "Hyung, I can't breathe." The roar of 70,000 voices blurred into a distant ocean as Jimin's body moved before his thoughts could catch up. The stage beneath his feet vibrated with bass that no longer mattered, smoke curling around their ankles like a living thing, hot and metallic in his lungs. This was supposed to be his night, the dream stage, the one rehearsed into muscle memory, the one promised after years of waiting, but all he could see was Jungkook's back, rigid, shoulders shaking as if the air itself had turned against him. Jimin reached him just as the spotlight snapped back on. Jungkook's face was pale under the lights, eyes unfocused, lips parted in a breath that refused to come. The choreography called for Jimin to step forward, center, to claim the moment the crowd had been waiting for. He felt the weight of it like gravity tugging at his spine. Instead, he turned away from the mark. He wrapped his arms around Jungkook from behind, firm and steady, one hand pressing between Jungkook's shoulders, the other anchoring his wrist. Jimin leaned in, mouth near Jungkook's ear, voice low enough to be swallowed by the music. "Follow me. In. Out. I've got you." The cameras caught it all. The world would later call it instinct, professionalism, brotherhood. None of them would hear the truth in Jungkook's broken exhale as it finally came, or feel the way his body sagged into Jimin's like a confession. Jimin had always known how to read Jungkook's silences. He knew the way Jungkook tapped his thumb when anxiety crept in, the way he avoided eye contact right before panic struck, the way he laughed too loudly to hide it. What the audience didn't know was that Jungkook hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night for weeks, haunted by a mistake no one else had noticed but him, a cracked note during rehearsal that had burrowed into his mind like a curse. As the music continued without them, Jimin made a choice that would echo long after the lights went out. He guided Jungkook off the stage, past the blinding LEDs and into the narrow, shadowed corridor behind the set. The crowd gasped, then murmured, confusion rippling outward. The dream stage slipped from Jimin's grasp like sand, and he let it go. Backstage smelled of sweat, ozone, and old wood. The music thudded through the walls, muffled now, like a heartbeat heard underwater. Jungkook bent forward, hands braced on his knees, breath hitching violently. Jimin knelt in front of him without hesitation, eyes level, unblinking. "Look at me," Jimin said softly. Jungkook shook his head, curls falling into his eyes. "I ruined it," he whispered. "I ruined your stage." Jimin's jaw tightened. He reached up, brushing Jungkook's hair back with fingers that trembled only when they were out of sight. "You didn't ruin anything. Stages can wait. You can't." The words surprised them both. Jimin felt something crack open inside his chest, a truth he'd carried quietly for years, hidden beneath smiles and jokes and shared glances that lingered a second too long. Jungkook looked at him then, really looked, eyes glassy but searching. "Why do you always choose me?" Jungkook asked, voice raw. "Even when it costs you?" Jimin didn't answer right away. He pressed his forehead to Jungkook's, the contact grounding, electric. The noise of the arena faded until there was only breathing, shared and slowly evening out. "Because," he said finally, "some dreams are louder when they're silent." They stayed like that longer than they should have. Crew members hovered at a respectful distance, unsure whether to interrupt. Somewhere, a manager argued urgently into a headset. The performance went on without them, history bending slightly off its expected course. In the quiet that followed, memories surfaced uninvited. Jimin remembered the first time Jungkook had frozen during training years ago, a kid with too much talent and too much fear, standing alone in a practice room long after everyone else had left. Jimin had sat beside him then too, sharing a warm drink, saying nothing until Jungkook spoke first. Silence had always been their language. Jungkook straightened slowly, wiping his face with the heel of his hand. His breathing steadied, but his eyes were still haunted. "They're going to be angry," he said. "At you." Jimin smiled, small and certain. "Let them." When they finally returned to the stage, hand in hand but spaced just enough for the cameras to misread, the applause was thunderous, confused, then reverent. Jimin stayed in the shadows, letting others take center. Each cheer felt like a door closing on what could have been, and he accepted it without regret. After the concert, long past midnight, They sat alone in the empty arena. The seats stretched upward like a sleeping city, lights dimmed to a soft glow. Jungkook traced patterns on the floor with his sneaker, a nervous habit he'd never grown out of. I was scared, Jungkook said quietly. Not of the crowd. Of myself. Of failing again. Jimin leaned back on his hands, gaze lifted to the ceiling. Fear doesn't mean you're weak, he said. It means you care. Jungkook nodded, then hesitated. And you? Don't you ever get scared? Jimin closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself imagine the stage he'd walked away from, the solo that would now live only in rehearsals and what ifs. All the time, he admitted. I'm scared of wanting things I'm not supposed to want. The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Jungkook looked at him, something unspoken brightening his gaze. He reached out, fingers brushing Jimin's sleeve, tentative but deliberate. The embrace that followed was nothing like the one on stage. There were no cameras, no music, no audience to misinterpret it. Just two people holding on in the vast quiet, breathing each other in, aware that something had shifted irreversibly. In giving up the dream stage, Jimin had found another kind of center, one that didn't shine, but endured. And Jungkook, held together by that sacrifice, finally believed that some love didn't need words, applause, or permission to be real. The arena was empty, but the tension followed them into the hallway like a second shadow. Jungkook broke the silence first, his voice sharp, almost angry, as if fear had nowhere else to go. You shouldn't have done that. You know that, right? You threw everything away for me. Jimin stopped walking. The suddenness of it made Jungkook nearly collide with his back. Jimin turned, eyes dark, jaw tight, the softness from earlier replaced by something raw and unguarded. Don't decide what my everything is, he said quietly. Jungkook scoffed, running a hand through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. That stage was yours. Everyone knew it. I heard the staff talking weeks ago. This was supposed to change things for you. And watching you break would have changed things for me forever. Jimin shot back, the words landed hard. Jungkook froze, breath catching again, but this time not from panic. This was something deeper, messier. You don't get it, he said, voice shaking despite his attempt to sound strong. I'm tired of being the reason you sacrifice yourself. Jimin stepped closer, closing the distance Jungkook kept trying to create. And I'm tired of pretending my choices are accidents. That made Jungkook look up. Their eyes locked, the air between them suddenly charged, heavy with everything unsaid over the years. The hallway lights hummed softly above them, the only witnesses. You think I didn't see it? Jungkook said, almost accusing. The way you looked at me before you turned away from the center. You already decided. Yes, Jimin admitted without hesitation. I did. Jungkook laughed once, bitter and disbelieving. You're unbelievable. I know, Jimin replied, voice softer now. But tell me this, if it were me shaking out there, if it were my chest locking up, would you have stayed on that stage? Jungkook opened his mouth, then closed it. His shoulders sagged. No, he whispered, the confession cracked something open. Jungkook turned away, pressing his palms against the wall, forehead resting against the cool surface. That's the problem. We keep choosing each other like this, and one day it's going to explode. Jimin approached slowly, careful, like he was stepping toward a wildfire he wasn't afraid to be burned by. Maybe it already has. Jungkook spun around. Don't say it like that. Like what? Like you're not scared. Jimin's smile was small, tired, painfully honest. I am scared. I'm scared because tonight made it impossible to keep lying. To myself. To you. Jungkook's throat tightened. The words he'd buried for years surged up all at once. When I couldn't breathe out there, he said, voice low and intense, the first thing I thought wasn't the crowd or the music. It was you. I needed you. That scares me more than any stage. Jimin reached out before thinking, fingers brushing Jungkook's wrist. Jungkook didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand, their fingers interlacing fully this time, deliberately. Then we're both already in too deep, Jimin said. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the hallway. Voices followed, staff, managers, the reality of consequences approaching fast. Jungkook glanced toward the sound, panic flickering again, but this time mixed with defiance. They're going to ask questions, he said. They'll want explanations. Someone to blame. Jimin squeezed his hand. Then let them look at me. Jungkook's eyes widened. No. I won't let you be the shield every time. Jimin leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper that burned. I'm not your shield. I'm standing here because I want to. The footsteps grew louder. Jungkook swallowed, then did something unexpected. He stepped closer, their foreheads almost touching again, but this time there was heat in the space between them, not just comfort. If this gets ugly, Jungkook said, don't you dare regret it. Jimin met his gaze, unwavering. I already gave up the stage. Regret didn't come with it. When the door at the end of the hallway opened and light spilled in, they separated just enough to look presentable, but the connection didn't fade. It clung to them through the questions, the tense meetings, the raised voices and sharp looks. Later, alone again in a quiet practice room, Jungkook finally let the anger drain out of him. He sat on the floor, back against the mirror, staring at their reflections. Everything feels different now, he murmured. Jimin sat beside him, shoulder brushing his. Because it is. Jungkook exhaled slowly, then turned his head, resting it against Jimin's shoulder. Promise me something. Jimin didn't hesitate. Anything. Next time, Jungkook said, eyes closing, voice heavy with emotion, don't disappear from the stage for me. Stay, but stay with me. Jimin closed his eyes too, heart pounding, the weight of that promise settling deep in his chest. Then don't run away from me when it gets hard. Jungkook nodded once, silently. In the mirror, their reflections leaned together, two figures bound by a choice that had already crossed the line between devotion and something far more dangerous, far more impossible to hide. The practice room door clicked shut behind them, sealing in a silence so dense it felt heavier than the noise of the stadium ever had. Jungkook was the first to break it, his voice low but edged with fire. Do you know what they're saying now? He paced the length of the room, shoes squeaking against the polished floor. That you lost control. That you acted emotionally. That I'm a liability. Jimin didn't flinch. He leaned against the mirror, arms crossed, watching Jungkook with an intensity that made Jungkook stop mid-step. And what are you saying? I'm saying I hate that my weakness keeps becoming your headline, Jungkook snapped. I hate that when people talk about tonight, they won't talk about the music. They'll talk about you leaving the center for me like I'm something fragile that needs saving. Jimin pushed himself off the mirror, closing the distance between them. You're not fragile. You're human. That's not how this industry sees it, Jungkook shot back. You of all people should know that. Jimin laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. I do know. I also know what it costs to pretend you're unbreakable until you actually shatter. Jungkook clenched his fists. Then why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you trust me enough to decide together? Because there was no time, Jimin replied sharply. Because you were drowning right in front of me, and I refused to stand still and watch. The words hit like a slap. Jungkook's anger faltered, replaced by something dangerously close to tears. He turned away, breathing hard. You always do this, he said. You decide for both of us. You act like you're okay being the one who loses. Jimin stepped closer, his voice dropping, trembling now despite his control. I'm not okay. I just decided you mattered more. Jungkook spun around. Do you hear yourself? That's not fair. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to take the center without looking back at me every time. Jimin's eyes darkened. What if what I want is standing right here, arguing with me because he's still alive and breathing instead of collapsing alone on a stage? The room went silent again, but this time it was charged, electric. Jungkook stared at him, chest rising and falling rapidly. You make it sound like I'm your responsibility. No, Jimin said immediately. You're my choice. That stopped Jungkook cold. You can't just say things like that, Jungkook whispered. Not when everything is already on the edge. Why? Jimin asked, stepping even closer until there was barely any space left between them. Because someone might see? Or because you might feel it too clearly? Jungkook's voice broke. Because if I let myself feel it, I won't know how to stop. Jimin reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before resting his hand over Jungkook's racing heart. The contact was simple, innocent, but it sent a visible shudder through Jungkook's body. "Then don't stop," Jimin said softly. "Just don't run." Jungkook closed his eyes, forehead dropping against Jimin's shoulder. "I'm angry," he admitted. "I'm scared. And part of me wants to scream at you for making me care this much." Jimin's arms came around him slowly, carefully, like he was asking permission without words. Jungkook didn't resist. He leaned into the embrace, fingers gripping the fabric of Jimin's jacket as if anchoring himself. "Good," Jimin murmured near his ear. "It means you're still here." They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing sinking, tension melting into something deeper and heavier. When Jungkook finally pulled back, his eyes were wet but steady. "They warned me," Jungkook said quietly. "They said attachment makes you weak. That if you rely on one person too much, you lose yourself." Jimin met his gaze. "And what do you think?" Jungkook swallowed. "I think losing you would destroy me far more than any stage ever could." Jimin's breath caught. For the first time since the lights went out, he looked truly shaken. "Jungkook, I'm not saying this is easy," Jungkook continued, voice firm despite the emotion. "Or safe. Or even allowed. I'm saying tonight proved something I can't ignore anymore." Jimin nodded slowly. "That we crossed a line. That the line was never really there," Jungkook corrected. "Outside the practice room, the world waited with rumors, backlash, and consequences neither of them could control. Inside, something fragile but powerful had settled between them, a truth spoken aloud at last." Jimin rested his forehead against Jungkook's, a faint, bittersweet smile on his lips. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we face it awake." Jungkook nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "Together." And for the first time that night, neither of them looked back at the stage they had left behind. The morning after arrived without mercy. Jimin woke to the vibration of his phone against the nightstand, relentless, impatient. He didn't need to look at the screen to know what it was. Jungkook was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed across the room, shoulders tense, scrolling silently with a jaw set too tight. "They leaked it," Jungkook said flatly. Jimin sat up. "What exactly is it?" "The angle," Jungkook replied, turning the phone so Jimin could see. A paused video frame filled the screen, Jimin's arms around him, the moment backstage, cropped just enough to feel invasive. Headlines screamed speculation, concern twisted into accusation. Some called it devotion. Others called it manipulation. A few called it something far more dangerous. Jimin exhaled slowly. "They were going to talk anyway." Jungkook laughed, sharp and humorless. "Talk? They're dissecting us like we're a scandal waiting to explode." Jimin stood, crossing the room in 2 strides. "Look at me," he said. Jungkook didn't. "This is what I meant," he continued, voice rising. "This is the consequence. Not just for me, for you. They're saying you staged it. That you wanted attention. And you think I care about that." Jimin cut in. "I do." Jungkook snapped, finally meeting his eyes. "Because I know how much you've swallowed over the years. How you smile and take it and pretend it doesn't hurt." Jimin's expression hardened. "Don't rewrite me into a victim to make yourself feel guilty. That's not what I'm doing. Then stop trying to protect me by pushing me away," Jimin said, voice firm, controlled, dangerous in its calm. "I made my choice. Don't take it from me." Jungkook stood abruptly. "You think this is just about choice?" He ran his hands through his hair, pacing again, the room suddenly too small. "They called me into a meeting this morning. Without you." Jimin's chest tightened. "What did they say?" Jungkook hesitated, then laughed again, this time brittle. "They asked if I was dependent. If you were emotionally influencing my stability." Jimin's fists clenched. "That's crossing a line." "They already crossed it," Jungkook shot back. "And then they asked something worse." Silence fell between them. "They asked," Jungkook continued quietly, "if there was something I wasn't telling them. Something more than friendship." Jimin felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What did you say?" "I said no," Jungkook replied immediately, then stopped. His voice dropped. "I said no, but I hated myself for how easily it came out." Jimin stepped closer, searching his face. Jungkook, don't, Jungkook interrupted, eyes blazing now. Don't comfort me. I don't want to be comforted. I want to know why lying felt like betrayal. Jimin swallowed hard. Because the truth has been sitting between us for a long time. Jungkook laughed softly, disbelief and pain tangled together. You're saying this like it's obvious. It is to me, Jimin said. I just didn't know if it was to you. Jungkook stopped pacing. You think I don't feel it? He demanded. You think I didn't feel your hands shaking when you held me? Or the way you looked at me like the world could end and you'd still stay? Jimin's voice broke for the first time. Then why are you so determined to run from it? Because if I don't, Jungkook said, stepping closer until they were almost chest to chest, everything burns. Careers. Trust. The image they built for us. Jimin's eyes softened, but his resolve didn't waver. And if we do run, what burns then? Jungkook had no answer. The room filled with the sound of their breathing, uneven, exposed. Jungkook lifted his hand, stopping just short of touching Jimin's chest, as if the space itself was the last boundary he was afraid to cross. I'm angry at you, Jungkook admitted. For being so sure. For loving so recklessly. Jimin leaned in just enough for Jungkook to feel his warmth. I'm angry at you too, he said quietly. For pretending this doesn't already own us. Jungkook's hand finally pressed against Jimin's chest, right over his heart. If this destroys you, he whispered, I'll never forgive myself. Jimin covered Jungkook's hand with his own, fingers threading together. If I lose you because I stayed silent, he replied, I won't forgive myself either. The knock on the door came like a gunshot, both of them froze. Jungkook pulled his hand back slowly, the reality of the world rushing in again. That's them, he said. They want answers. Clean ones. Jimin straightened, shoulders back, expression unreadable. Then we give them professionalism, he said. Not lies. Not confessions. Just truth shaped carefully. Jungkook searched his face. And us. Jimin held his gaze, unwavering. We don't disappear. Jungkook nodded, something fierce settling behind his eyes. Okay, he said. Then whatever they throw at us. I'm not facing it alone anymore. Jimin reached out, squeezing his hand once before letting go. Neither am I. When the door opened and the noise of authority flooded the room, neither of them stepped back. They stood side by side, not touching, but undeniably aligned, two hearts racing in sync, braced for impact, fully aware that the most dangerous part of the story had only just begun. The conference room was colder than the hallway, air-conditioned to the point of hostility. The glass table reflected their faces too clearly, stripping away any illusion of control. Managers sat on one side, legal advisors on the other, expressions carefully neutral. Jimin and Jungkook took their seats side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's heat. The first question came sharp and rehearsed. Was the interruption planned? No, Jimin answered immediately yes, Jungkook said at the same time. Every head turned. Jimin's breath hitched. Jungkook didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, knuckles white. Not planned by the company, Jungkook clarified, voice steady but tight. Planned by instinct. A murmur rippled across the room. One of the advisors adjusted his glasses. Instinct is a dangerous word. So is negligence, Jungkook shot back before Jimin could stop him. If someone is collapsing, you don't ask permission to help. Jimin turned toward him sharply. Jungkook, no, Jungkook said, finally looking at him. You said don't disappear. I'm not. Silence fell again, thicker now. A senior manager leaned forward. This isn't about help. It's about boundaries. About optics. Jimin felt something snap. He leaned in too, voice calm but cutting. Then maybe the optics are the problem. The room stiffened. You gave up a scheduled centerpiece, the manager continued. Do you understand what that means for future positioning? Yes, Jimin said. And I would do it again. Jungkook's head snapped toward him. Hyung. Jimin didn't look away from the table. I won't apologize for choosing a person over a moment. One of the advisors sighed. This level of emotional attachment raises concerns. Jungkook laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You train us to pour our souls into music, into each other, into performance. And now you're surprised something real came out? That's enough, another voice said, sharper now. We need clarity. Are you too emotionally involved beyond what is appropriate? The question landed like a blade. Jimin felt Jungkook tense beside him, felt the barely contained storm. Before Jungkook could speak, Jimin answered. We are honest with each other. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting, Jimin replied. Jungkook turned fully toward him then, eyes wide, furious and grateful all at once. You're protecting me again. I'm protecting us, Jimin said quietly. There's a difference. The meeting dragged on, questions circling, probing, trying to force a shape onto something that refused to be contained. By the time they were dismissed, Jungkook's jaw ached from holding everything in. They didn't speak until they were back in the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft finality. The hum of dissent filled the space. That was reckless, Jungkook said finally. Jimin let out a slow breath. So we're staying silent all these years. Jungkook turned to him, anger flaring again. You didn't even look at me before you answered. Because if I had, Jimin said, meeting his eyes now, I wouldn't have been able to lie. And I wasn't lying. The elevator stopped. The doors opened to an empty hallway. Jungkook stepped out, then spun around, blocking Jimin's path. Do you realize what you just did? You put yourself directly in their line of fire. Jimin leaned in, close enough that Jungkook could feel his breath. I've been there for a long time. You just started noticing. Jungkook's voice dropped, shaking with emotion. I don't want to be your reason for getting hurt. Jimin's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. You're not my reason. You're my truth. Jungkook swallowed hard. Say that again. You're my truth. Something broke then. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's jacket, pulling him close, forehead pressed against his chest, breathing uneven. I'm terrified, he admitted. Of what they'll do. Of what this means. Of how much I need you. Jimin wrapped his arms around him without hesitation, holding him like the world wasn't watching. I know, he murmured. I am too. Jungkook pulled back just enough to look at him, eyes red but burning. If this turns ugly, it will, Jimin interrupted gently. But we won't. Jungkook let out a shaky laugh. You're impossible. And you're worth it. They stood there longer than they should have, the hallway quiet, the weight of everything pressing down. Eventually, Jungkook straightened, wiping his face, resolve settling into his posture. Okay, he said. Then we stop pretending we're unaffected. We stop letting them frame this as weakness. Jimin nodded. We stand our ground. Jungkook reached out, squeezing his hand once, hard. Together. Together wasn't a promise anymore. It was a decision. The rehearsal hall that night felt like a battlefield disguised as routine. Music blasted from the speakers, loud and unforgiving, but it couldn't drown out the tension hanging between them. Jungkook missed a step for the first time in years, his foot sliding half a beat too late. The mistake echoed louder than the bass again. The choreographer snapped. Jungkook nodded, jaw clenched, sweat already dripping down his neck. Jimin watched from across the room, chest tight. He knew that look too well, the one Jungkook wore when pressure turned inward, when anger became fuel and poison at the same time. The music restarted. Jungkook danced harder, sharper, almost violent, as if he could outrun the thoughts chasing him. Jimin stepped closer without realizing it. Stop, Jungkook suddenly shouted, throwing his headset to the floor. The room froze, every eye turned toward them. Jungkook's chest heaved. I can't do this like nothing happened. The choreographer frowned. This isn't the time. Yes, it is, Jungkook cut in, voice trembling but loud. Because pretending everything's fine is exactly why people break. Silence crashed down. Jimin moved before anyone else could speak. We need 5 minutes, he said firmly. The choreographer hesitated, then sighed. 5. They walked out together, the door slamming shut behind them. The hallway was dim, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Jungkook shoved his hands into his hair, pacing. They're watching me like I'm unstable. Like I'm one wrong breath away from being replaced. Jimin stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Look at me. Jungkook shook his head. I don't want reassurance. Too bad, Jimin said sharply. You're getting truth. Jungkook finally stopped, eyes blazing. Then tell me the truth. Tell me you won't regret this when they start choosing safer options. When they decide I'm too risky to stand next to you. Jimin's voice dropped, intense. If they ask me to step away from you, I'll walk away from them first. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You can't say that so easily. I can, Jimin replied. Because I already chose. That's exactly what scares me, Jungkook whispered. You're burning bridges for me while I'm still learning how to stand. Jimin took a step closer, lowering his voice. I'm not burning bridges. I'm refusing cages. Jungkook laughed bitterly. You make it sound noble. It's not, Jimin admitted. It's terrifying. But I'd rather be terrified with you than empty without you. Jungkook's anger cracked, emotion flooding through the gaps. Do you know what they said after the meeting? He asked. They said closeness creates weakness. That dependence ruins discipline. Jimin's eyes darkened. And what did you think? I thought, Jungkook said slowly, that discipline without humanity is just control. Jimin smiled faintly. Exactly. Footsteps echoed down the hall. A manager appeared, face tight. Jungkook. Jimin. There's something you should see. They followed him into a smaller room where a tablet waited on the table. A live feed of social media scrolled endlessly, divided opinions, praise clashing violently with outrage. Hashtags rising faster than anyone expected. Support loud. Backlash louder, they're turning it into a narrative, the manager said. A dangerous one. Jungkook swallowed. About us. Yes. Jimin leaned over the screen, eyes scanning. Then we don't let them twist it. The manager frowned. That's not how this works. Jimin looked up, gaze steady. It can. Jungkook turned to him sharply. What are you thinking? Jimin met his eyes. We speak carefully, but honestly. No denial. No dramatics. Just clarity. That could backfire, Jungkook said. So could silence, Jimin replied. The manager sighed heavily. I'll take this upstairs. No promises. When they were alone again, Jungkook exhaled shakily. You're really not backing down. Jimin shook his head. I spent too many years shrinking my heart to fit expectations. Jungkook stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. If this costs you, I need you to know I never asked for it. Jimin reached out, gripping Jungkook's wrist firmly. And I need you to know I'd still choose it. Jungkook's eyes burned. You're dangerous. Jimin smiled sadly. So are you. They stood there, hearts pounding, fully aware that the line between courage and consequence had disappeared. Whatever came next would not be gentle. But neither of them stepped back because this time, running wasn't an option. The statement went live at dawn. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no confessions, no carefully staged smiles. Just two voices, steady and unedited, speaking side by side. Jimin talked about choice, about responsibility meaning more than perfection. Jungkook talked about fear, about how silence almost broke him, and how being held together saved him. They didn't name what the world kept trying to label, but they didn't deny it either. They let the truth breathe without explanation. The reaction was immediate and violent in its honesty. Applause and outrage collided. Some called it brave. Others called it reckless. The company scrambled, damage control meetings blurring into one another, but something irreversible had already happened. The narrative was no longer owned by anyone else. That evening, after the noise settled into a dull roar, Jimin and Jungkook found themselves alone on the same stage where it had all begun. The seats were empty, the lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Dust floated lazily in the air, visible only because the spotlight was gentle now. Jungkook stood at center, breathing slowly, testing the space again. I thought I'd hate this place after everything, he said quietly. But I don't. Jimin stepped up beside him. It's just a stage, he replied. It only hurts when we forget we're more than it. Jungkook glanced at him, eyes tired but clear. You really don't regret it? Jimin shook his head. I regret the years I spent thinking I had to disappear to survive. Jungkook let out a soft laugh, then grew serious. I don't feel broken anymore. Jimin's chest tightened at the words. You never were. They stood there in silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand openly this time, fingers lacing without hesitation. There were no cameras to catch it, no crowd to interpret it. Just truth, simple and unguarded. I don't know what happens next, Jungkook admitted. For us. For everything. Jimin squeezed his hand gently. Neither do I. But I know this, I won't trade you for certainty. Jungkook nodded, eyes shining. Then stay. I am, Jimin said. Not as a shield. Not as a sacrifice. As myself. The lights dimmed further, and for the first time, the stage didn't feel like a test. It felt like a memory, important, meaningful, but no longer in control. They walked off together, not rushed, not hidden, leaving behind the echo of applause that no longer defined them. What remained was quieter, stronger, and undeniably real. And in the end, it wasn't the dream stage that changed their lives, but the silent embrace that proved some love doesn't need permission to be louder than words.